this short video, I'd like to introduce the continent of Antarctica. I'll share a little bit about scientists getting there, what life is like in such a cold and windy place, and a short introduction to the landforms and animals that make this place so unique. Most scientists will arrive to Antarctica on board a ship or an airplane, and in my case, I fly down on an airplane called the C-17. The flight from New Zealand to Antarctica takes about 5 hours and provides our first views of the icy continent. Once we arrive, we take our first cold steps onto the ice. At this point, we say goodbye to our C-17 and make our way to the main base, which is a bit like a small city. It has apartments to sleep in, warehouses for all of our gear, gymnasiums to stay in, and a galley where we eat all of our meals. In order to prepare for scientific fieldwork, my team and I must complete specialized training, getting our first little taste of the bitter cold and blustery winds. For this training, we get to test our gear by setting up our tents, practicing teamwork, activities like ice climbing, and even preparing our own meals. Once we get all trained up, we load all of our gear into another airplane, this time called a Basler, and we fly off to the field site, far from the comforts of the main base. Once we land at our field site, unpack all of our gear, and the Basler goes back to the main base. This is where we start to prepare our campsite. We set up our tents for sleeping and cooking, our little homes away from home. Sleeping on snow is a wonderful experience as long as you have a nice thick sleeping bag. It's really important to be well fed while working so far from home, and we're very lucky to have great food to keep our engines running, like pizza, a special Thanksgiving meal, and even cupcakes. And we eat all together as a team. While we're at camp, we may experience many things just like in normal life. And a big part of normal life is going to the bathroom.
Just went to the bathroom.
In some cases, it's just a little bit more difficult. Sometimes the weather can be so cold and windy, makes it very difficult to walk from your tent to the outhouse.
See how this goes.
Serious situation here. I've had to go to
In some cases, you can even get stuck in the outhouse. Luckily, we have some friends to help us get out of sticky situations.
Oh, thank you. It's alright, you're safe now. You're safe now.
Once we get our camp all set up, we can begin to go to the sites we are interested in doing our field work. This includes getting in yet another airplane, this time called a Twin Otter, where we fly around to our field sites of interest. We use these smaller airplanes to get access to sites that are very far away or difficult to get to. We also fly in helicopters that take us to the field sites the airplanes cannot. Both helicopters and airplanes provide beautiful views of the surrounding area. Here we're flying in a helicopter all the way up to a mountaintop. The view up here shows how big this continent really is. You can see all the rugged mountains and the big rivers of ice called glaciers coming down the sides of the mountains. As we fly around quickly, look around and see if you can find any interesting features in the ice. Some of these big cracks are called crevasses. Once we have spotted an area of interest, the helicopter pilot lands us safely at the site and we unload. A typical drop-off by a helicopter can be quite fun but also intense. We unload our gear, huddle around it, and wait for the helicopter to take off again, leaving us to do our fieldwork. When we get to a particular location, this is when the fun starts and we can start to study the rocks. The rocks in Antarctica have lots of special features, like this one that has a hole eroded all the way through it, formed by the very strong winds. These winds can also erode the glacier ice right next to a mountain. This feature here is called a wind scoop and is particularly awesome. You can see the wind scoop and the wind swirling around from the top to the bottom, almost like a sideways tornado. For this video, I ran ahead of my team so that I can view them coming down through the wind scoop. See if you can see them. My team looks at rocks left behind by glaciers, and glaciers are big rivers of ice that erode the rock and deposit smaller bits along the side. Being very careful to select the rocks properly, we are able to study how the glacier has changed over time. We can also study how the rocks move by installing a GPS sensor on the mountain and keep track of how much it moves every year. Along the way during our work, we encounter lots of interesting things near the rocks, like this, a rare plant called a moss. We also encounter seal mummies. These are mummified remains of seals that have become lost during storms and are preserved in the very cold and dry conditions. Scientists can also study birds in the Antarctic. These birds are called snow petrels, and this is a photo inside one of their nests. The snow petrel is a hard-working bird that hunts for food in the ocean and raises its babies in the shelter of a rock nest. The most famous bird in Antarctica is the penguin. These little guys live in big communities called rookeries. This is a shot from a small rookery that has over 5,000 penguins all living together. There are many different types of penguins, and here we see the smaller Adelie penguin hanging out with the much larger emperor penguin. Have a listen, see if you can figure out what they're saying. Emperor penguins, seen here, are the only penguins that stay in Antarctica for the entire year, where they have to endure the amazingly cold temperatures and complete darkness for more than 3 months out of the year. And of course, penguins can't fly, and it's quite hard to walk on ice, so they've learned to scoot along on their bellies. Lots of animals depend on the ocean, either as their home or for food. The big orca whale is one of those animals, and this is a short shot from where the ice meets the ocean and shows how the orcas behave. As you can see, they travel together, and when they come up for air, they took a look to the ice edge to see if maybe a seal or a penguin is dangling off the side. As I mentioned earlier, scientists can sail through the waters of the Antarctic in large ice-strengthened ships to study the ocean, the animals, or the seafloor. Here's Caitlin aboard a Korean icebreaker where she's studying the sea ice. While on the ship, scientists can lower scientific instruments to sample what's on the seafloor. And once this is brought to the surface, scientists are able to study the rock layers and understand a little bit more about the ocean. They also get to see incredibly huge icebergs. Some are the size of skyscrapers. Once we have completed our work, we pack up all our gear again, take one last team photo, and wait for that all-important last flight back home. Thanks again for your attention, and get those questions ready.